I was under anesthesia for a major spinal surgery when my parents emptied my college fund. $31,000, transferred straight into my sister's joint account. My mother sent a text message to my father right outside my hospital room. Do it now before the little brat wakes up from the anesthesia. My nurse saw the bank alert flashing on my phone screen before I even opened my eyes. She knew my family history. She called someone. By the time I woke up, the agonizing pain in my spine had not even fully registered before I saw a man in a dark suit standing at the foot of my bed. "Hello, Zuri," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I am from the Federal Financial Intelligence Agency. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you." The harsh fluorescent lights of the recovery room blinded me as the anesthesia slowly wore off. Every breath felt like crushed glass in my lungs, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the words the man in the suit was speaking. He introduced himself as Agent Sterling. He held up a tablet displaying a financial ledger. $31,000, he repeated. The exact amount was drained from the educational trust account under your name exactly 42 minutes ago. Authorized through a forged digital signature originating from a device registered to your mother, Vivian. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the familiar coldness spread through my chest. They took it. They always took it. They took my peace. They took my security. They took my money while I lay cut open on an operating table. They always took what they felt entitled to. My parents, Desmond and Vivian, had always treated my existence as a bank to fund their favorite child, my older sister Jada. I tried to speak, but my throat was completely dry. Agent Sterling poured a small cup of water and held the straw to my lips. He watched me with a mixture of professional detachment and quiet sympathy. "I did not authorize any transfer." I whispered, my voice raspy and weak. "I have been unconscious for 6 hours." Agent Sterling nodded slowly. "We are well aware of your medical status, Zuri. That is precisely why I am here. The account they accessed was flagged in our system. We received an automated alert the moment the transaction was initiated. Your nurse, who was listed as a trusted medical contact, confirmed you were fully incapacitated. This is a clear case of wire fraud." Before I could process the magnitude of a federal agent standing in my hospital room, the heavy wooden door swung open. My parents walked in. My mother, Vivian, was holding a massive, ostentatious arrangement of cheap plastic flowers. My father, Desmond, trailed behind her, checking his expensive watch. A watch I knew he had bought using the emergency funds I had given them last year. They wore their perfectly practiced smiles, the ones they used at our megachurch in Atlanta, to show everyone what a blessed and loving family we were. "Oh, my sweet baby girl," my mother cooed, rushing toward the bed. "We were so worried about you. The surgery took forever. Her performance was flawless. Her performance was always flawless. Her performance was a shield she used to hide her cruelty." She stopped dead in her tracks when she noticed Agent Sterling stepping out from the shadows near the window. The fake smile melted off her face, instantly replaced by a hardened, defensive mask. "Who are you?" my father demanded, puffing out his chest as he stepped in front of my mother. "This is a private recovery room. We are her parents." Agent Sterling did not flinch. He calmly pulled his badge from his breast pocket and held it up for them to see. "I am Agent Sterling with the Federal Financial Intelligence Agency. We are investigating a fraudulent wire transfer of $31,000 initiated from Mrs. Vivian's device while your daughter was under general anesthesia." The air in the room vanished. I watched my mother's eyes dart around, searching for a way out, searching for a scapegoat. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "Fraud! Are you out of your mind?" My mother's voice hit that shrill, hysterical pitch she always used when she was cornered. "Zuri begged me to transfer that money. She was crying this morning before the surgery, terrified about her debts. She gave me her passwords and pleaded with me to move the funds to her sister to pay off a loan. She is clearly confused from the medication." My father immediately jumped in to back her up. "You know how she gets," he said, glaring at me with absolute contempt. "You are making a scene again, Zuri. Always making a scene. Your sister Jada and her husband Preston are trying to close on a luxury property today, and you are playing the victim to ruin their moment. You have no need for that money lying flat on your back anyway. I lay there feeling the stitches in my spine pull tight, listening to the people who gave me life, casually throw me to the wolves to protect their golden child. They lied. They lied to my face. They lied to a federal agent. They lied to protect the very people who contributed nothing to our family legacy. Agent Sterling did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pair of silver handcuffs. The metallic clink echoed loudly against the sterile hospital walls. "You do not seem to understand the gravity of your situation," Mrs. Vivian Agent Sterling said, his tone dropping to a chilling register. "That account you drained did not belong to Zuri. It never belonged to Zuri. It was a bait trust, a trap account established 5 years ago by the late Mrs. Hattie, your mother-in-law. She placed it under the direct management of the Internal Revenue Service because she explicitly suspected you would try to steal from Zuri when she was vulnerable. You did not steal from your daughter today. You stole directly from the federal government, and you just confessed to initiating the transfer. You have committed federal wire fraud." My parents stood frozen, the cheap plastic flowers slipping from my mother's hands and hitting the hospital floor with a dull, hollow thud. "You have exactly 24 hours to reverse the wire transfer. If the Federal Reserve does not see $31,000 returned to the exact routing number it was stolen from by noon tomorrow, I will personally sign the arrest warrants." The metallic click of Agent Sterling's pen sounded like a gavel dropping in a courtroom. He did not wait for an apology or an explanation. He simply turned on his heel and walked out of the recovery room, leaving a suffocating silence behind him. My father Desmond paced the floor, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of rage and panic. My mother Vivian leaned against the cold hospital wall, hyperventilating as she clutched her expensive leather handbag. Neither of them stepped forward to check on my surgical wounds. Neither of them asked about the titanium screws that had just been drilled into my lower spine. They only cared about their impending prison sentences. Before my father could open his mouth to hurl another baseless insult at me, the heavy wooden door of the hospital room violently swung open again. In walked my older sister Jada, flanked by her husband Preston. Preston was a wealthy white man whose family ran a notoriously corrupt and aggressive real estate empire right here in Atlanta. My parents practically worshipped the ground he walked on. To them, Preston was the ultimate status symbol, the golden ticket that gave Jada access to elite country clubs and high society galas. They never cared that Preston treated our family like his personal charity project. They blindly agreed with every word he said, and they certainly never cared that he looked right through me as if I was entirely invisible. Jada stomped into the room wearing a pristine cream-colored designer suit, utterly oblivious to the sterile life or death environment of a spinal recovery ward. She did not ask how my high-risk surgery went. She did not ask if I was in agony. She glared at me, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "You are unbelievably selfish, Zuri." Jada spat out, her voice dripping with venom. "We are supposed to be closing on a luxury condominium project tomorrow morning. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to have federal agents calling Preston's bank over a measly $31,000? Preston stepped forward smoothly, pushing Jada aside. He did not look at me like a brother-in-law showing concern. He looked at me like a ruthless landlord about to evict a helpless tenant. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp single sheet of paper. He tossed it carelessly onto my lap. It landed right over my fresh surgical incision. I winced as a sharp spike of pain shot through my back, but I refused to break eye contact with him. I refused to let them see me sweat. "Sign it," Preston commanded. His voice was smooth but layered with an unearned arrogance that made my blood boil. "It is a voluntary gift affidavit. It retroactively reclassifies the $31,000 as a willing financial gift from you to Jada. My lawyers drafted it 10 minutes ago. Once you sign it, the fraud investigation is voided, the federal government backs off, and Agent Sterling goes away. You fix this mess right now." I looked down at the legal document resting on my hospital blanket, then slowly shifted my gaze back up to Preston. You want me to commit perjury to cover up a felony that your wife and my parents committed while my spine was literally sliced open on an operating table. My father lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. You will do exactly as Preston says. You owe this family. We raised you. We put up with your constant rebellion and your bad attitude. You are going to sign that paper right now, or you will face the absolute worst consequences. I stared at Desmond, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. Where a daughter's love should have been. What consequences? You already stole every single penny from the account Grandma Hattie left me. What else can you possibly take from me? Preston smiled, a cold, predatory smirk spreading across his face. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking down at me with pure condescension. Your health insurance, Zuri. You are still riding on your father's family policy because you are just a low-level wage earner. Do you know how much a complex lumbar spinal fusion costs without insurance coverage? The surgical suite, the anesthesiologist, the medications, the week of inpatient rehabilitation you are going to need. We are looking at a medical bill north of $150,000. Jada nodded eagerly, twisting her massive diamond wedding ring. Preston is exactly right. If you do not sign that gift certificate by the time we leave this room, Dad is going to call his Human Resources Department and retroactively cancel your health coverage effective yesterday. You will be buried in crippling medical debt for the rest of your miserable life. We actually need that $31,000 to secure the bridge loan for our condo project. You are just single and sitting in a cubicle all day. What do you even need that money for anyway? Stop being a jealous burden and help your family for once. I looked at the four of them gathered around my bed. My mother shivering in the corner like a cornered rat. My father puffing his chest out to impress his arrogant son-in-law. Jada whining about her luxury real estate portfolio. And Preston, the cruel orchestrator holding my basic healthcare hostage to force me into submission. For my entire life, they had drastically underestimated me. They assumed that because I stayed quiet, because I did not flaunt designer bags or lease luxury cars I could not afford, I was a massive failure. They had no idea what I actually did for a living. They had no idea I was a senior forensic financial auditor and cybersecurity director for one of the largest tech firms on the East Coast. They truly thought I was just a helpless data entry clerk surviving paycheck to paycheck. Slowly, deliberately ignoring the searing pain radiating down my lower back, I picked up the voluntary gift affidavit. I held it up high so Preston could see it clearly in the harsh hospital lighting. Then with steady hands I ripped the legal document straight down the middle. I stacked the halves and ripped the pieces again, letting the shredded confetti flutter down onto the pristine white hospital blanket. Preston's smug smile vanished instantly. My father gasped, taking a sudden step backward. "Are you completely insane?" Jada shrieked, her voice echoing down the hospital corridor. "You are going to be bankrupt and out on the street by tomorrow morning." I did not answer her. I reached over to the bedside table where my personal belongings had been placed before the surgery. I bypassed my smartphone and picked up a sleek, heavy matte black metal card. I pressed the red call button pinned to my pillow. Within seconds, the intercom crackled to life. "Yes, Miss Zuri, how can I help you?" the head nurse asked politely. "Please send the hospital billing supervisor up to my room immediately," I said, my voice steady, cold and echoing clearly through the speaker for my entire family to hear. "I need them to remove Desmond from my financial file entirely. I will be updating the billing system with my corporate platinum insurance card. It covers 100% of all medical, surgical, and private rehabilitation costs without limits. Oh, and please send hospital security up here as well. I have 4 unauthorized individuals harassing me in my room, and I need these leeches escorted off the premises right now." I dropped the heavy metal card onto the rolling tray table. It hit the surface with a loud, definitive clack. Preston stared at the card. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking ghostly pale. He recognized that specific black card. He knew exactly what it meant. He knew you only qualified for that specific tier of corporate wealth if your annual income and liquid assets were in the top 1%. He looked from the metal card to my face, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization he had messed with the wrong woman. My father's face contorted with a rage so visceral it looked like he might strike me right there in the surgical ward. But with hospital security stepping into the room, Desmond had no choice but to retreat. He grabbed my mother by the arm, dragging her toward the door. "Fine," he shouted, his voice echoing down the sterile hallway. "You want to be independent. You are completely on your own. Do not come crawling back to us when that fake piece of metal gets declined." Within 20 minutes, my father made good on his ultimate threat. He marched down to the hospital administration office and officially signed the paperwork to discharge me, explicitly stripping his name and his insurance policy from my file. My parents honestly believed I was bluffing. They were absolutely convinced I was a broke, low-level data clerk who had somehow gotten her hands on a prop credit card. They waited in the hospital parking lot, sitting in Preston's leased Range Rover, fully expecting to see orderlies wheel me out to the curb in a flimsy hospital gown. They expected to watch me cry, beg, and ultimately submit to their demands because I had no way to pay for a ride home, let alone a specialized spinal recovery facility. They waited for nothing. Up in my room, my corporate platinum card cleared a transaction for $75,000 without a single security flag. I did not just settle the surgical bill. I hired a private concierge medical transport service. While my family sat sweating in the Atlanta heat, a state-of-the-art climate-controlled private ambulance pulled up to the VIP exit. 2 private medics carefully transferred me onto a memory foam stretcher, treating me with the utmost respect, ensuring my newly fused spine was completely stabilized. As the ambulance glided past Preston's SUV, I did not even bother to look out the tinted window. I was headed straight to the Buckhead Rehabilitation Institute, the most exclusive high-security recovery center in the state, a place where professional athletes and billionaires went to heal. My parents could not even get past the front gate. But Desmond and Vivian were never going to take a defeat lying down. If they could not break my bank account, they were going to destroy my name. By Sunday morning, the smear campaign was in full swing at our mega church in downtown Atlanta. My parents had spent decades building their reputation in those pews. To them, church was not about faith. It was a social battlefield, a place to flaunt designer hats, brag about Jada's fictional success, and parade Preston around as their wealthy white savior son-in-law who supposedly elevated our family's status. While I was doing agonizing physical therapy to regain the feeling in my legs, my phone started vibrating relentlessly. The texts poured in from cousins, aunts, and busybody church elders. I opened a group message to find a video of my mother standing at the church podium during testimony time. She was weeping, wiping away non-existent tears with a silk handkerchief. "Please pray for my youngest daughter, Zuri." My mother sobbed to the congregation of 3,000 people. The spinal surgery was a success, but the heavy painkillers have completely destroyed her mind. She is experiencing severe paranoid delusions. She is hallucinating that her own family is stealing from her. She is even threatening to sue us, threatening to ruin her sister Jada and her wonderful husband Preston. We are just so heartbroken. The camera panned to Jada and Preston sitting in the front row, holding hands and looking appropriately devastated. Preston even had the audacity to drop a $500 check into the offering plate right after the speech, cementing his image as the benevolent, long-suffering son-in-law. The church congregation ate it up. They always did. The text messages on my phone were vicious. Aunts calling me a disgrace to the family legacy. Cousins telling me I needed to repent for disrespecting my parents. Church elders warning me that my toxic jealousy toward Jada's perfect marriage would send me straight to a life of misery. They wanted me to feel isolated. They wanted me to break down, call them, and apologize for making them look bad. They wanted me to sign that gift affidavit to make the federal investigation disappear in exchange for their forgiveness. I did not reply to a single message. I put my phone on silent, handed it to my private nurse, and asked for another round of physical therapy. Let them talk. Let them spin their elaborate web of lies to the entire congregation. Every lie my mother told from that pulpit was just another nail in her own coffin. I knew something they did not. The Federal Financial Intelligence Agency does not care about church gossip. They care about wire transfers. At 2 o'clock in this morning, the private suite at the rehabilitation center was dead silent. The only sound was the soft hum of my vital sign monitor. I was staring up at the ceiling calculating my next move when my encrypted work phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached over, carefully wincing at the stiffness in my lower back, and answered. "Miss Zuri." Agent Sterling's voice came through the receiver, crisp, professional, and wide awake. "I apologize for the late hour, but I knew you would want this update immediately. I am awake, Agent Sterling. What happened?" "The fish took the bait," he said smoothly. "Preston did not keep the $31,000 in your sister's domestic joint account. He was too desperate. 10 minutes ago, he initiated an offshore wire transfer, moving the exact stolen funds into a shell company account based in the Cayman Islands." I smiled in the dark, a cold, predatory smile. Why would a supposedly wealthy real estate developer panic and offshore $31,000 in the middle of the night? "Because his domestic accounts are heavily monitored," Agent Sterling replied. "We just ran a preliminary sweep. Preston's luxury condominium project is a complete facade. He is drowning in debt, actively defaulting on millions, and trying to patch a massive hole in his latest development before his investors find out. Moving stolen federal bait funds across international borders just elevated this from domestic wire fraud to international money laundering. The Federal Reserve has officially locked onto his digital footprint. We have him right where we want him." Agent Sterling paused for a moment. "What are your orders, Miss Zuri? We can move in and freeze his domestic assets right now." "No," I said, gripping the phone tightly. "Do not freeze anything yet. Let him think he got away with it. Let him spend the money. I want to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes." "Understood," Agent Sterling replied. "We will continue to monitor the offshore activity. Have a good night, Miss Zuri." The line went dead. I set the phone back down on the nightstand and pulled the heavy duvet over my chest. My family thought they had successfully destroyed my reputation. They thought they had secured their stolen money and secured their golden child's future. But Preston had just walked blindly into a federal trap, dragging my sister and my parents right in with him. The countdown had officially begun. I pushed the heavy-weighted duvet aside, my breath catching in my throat as a sharp spasm of fire radiated from my newly fused lumbar spine. Reaching for the sleek aluminum walking cane the physical therapist had left by my bedside, I forced myself to stand. The plush carpet of the high-security rehabilitation suite muffled my uneven footsteps as I made my way toward the expansive glass desk near the window. I bypassed the standard-issue hospital television and tapped the power button on the customized, heavily encrypted laptop I had instructed my assistant to courier from my home office. 3 high-resolution portable monitors flickered to life, simultaneously illuminating the darkened hospital room in a sharp, cool blue glow. My family had spent a lifetime treating me like a slow-witted burden who barely understood how to balance a basic checking account. Because I did not wear flashy designer labels or drive a leased luxury vehicle to Sunday service, they were absolutely convinced I was a financial failure. They had absolutely no idea that as a senior forensic financial auditor and cybersecurity director, tracking hidden digital footprints was not just my day job, it was my designated weapon. I spent my weeks dismantling complex corporate embezzlement rings and hunting down sophisticated cyber criminals for Fortune 500 companies. Preston thought he was a brilliant, untouchable mastermind because he knew how to route $31,000 through a generic offshore shell company. To me, his digital trail looked like a massive highway painted in neon yellow paint. I typed in my administrative credentials, bypassing 3 layers of biometric security to access the secure tracing software I had linked to Grandma Hattie's Federal Bait Trust years ago. Agent Sterling was completely right about the timeline. Preston was acting out of sheer, unadulterated desperation. The stolen money had landed in a Cayman Islands account, registered under a holding company named Apex Global Ventures. I ran that specific holding company through a proprietary global financial database I utilized for corporate audits. It took less than 40 seconds for the entire illusion of Preston's billionaire real estate empire to shatter across my glowing screens. He was not a successful developer building the future of Atlanta's skyline. He was the frantic architect of a crumbling crypto real estate pyramid scheme. He had been quietly taking massive cash deposits from wealthy, unsuspecting Atlanta investors, promising them high-yield tokenized shares in luxury condominiums that did not even possess basic city zoning permits yet. He was shifting funds from new investors to pay off the old ones. A classic Ponzi structure running entirely on borrowed time and empty promises. But the most spectacular discovery on my screens was not his fraudulent crypto ledger. It was the collateral he had utilized to secure his latest emergency bridge loan from a predatory lending firm. I opened a scanned, highly encrypted PDF of a commercial property deed linked to his latest shell company. I zoomed in on the collateral section and felt a cold, hard laugh build deep in my chest. Preston had not risked a single dime of his own wealthy family's money to prop up his failing business. He had quietly taken out a massive high-interest second mortgage on my parents' pristine Buckhead mansion. The very house my mother and father paraded at church as the ultimate symbol of our family's multi-generational wealth. The home they claimed was their sacred legacy was currently leveraged to the absolute roof by the arrogant white son-in-law they blindly worshipped. Preston had either forged their signatures outright or manipulated them into signing a blind power of attorney during one of their lavish family dinners. He had used their lifelong sanctuary to finance his illegal gambling, and my parents were too busy trying to destroy my reputation to realize they were already homeless on paper. Right as I was downloading the forged property deeds onto an encrypted flash drive, my personal phone vibrated violently against the glass desk. It was an audio message from Jada. I tapped the speaker icon, leaning heavily on my cane as my sister's arrogant, venomous voice filled the quiet room. "You really thought you did something with that fake black credit card today? Did not you? Suri?" Jada spat through the speaker, her voice dripping with sheer condescension. "Well, playtime is officially over. Mom and Dad just met with their estate lawyer. They have officially written you out of the family trust. You are getting absolutely nothing. And as for your pathetic little stunt with that fake federal agent at the hospital, Preston just retained the most aggressive, expensive defense attorney in the state of Georgia. We are filing a massive civil suit against you for defamation, slander, and intentional emotional distress. You are going to be sitting in a courtroom, explaining to a judge why you are a delusional, jealous liar who tried to extort her own family just because you are single and miserable. Prepare yourself to lose your cheap apartment and everything else you own, you absolute failure." The audio message ended with a sharp click. I did not type a single word back. Arguing with a loud, clueless pawn is a complete waste of energy when you are actively positioning your pieces to capture the king. I muted the phone, tossed it aside, and turned my full attention back to the glowing monitors. Jada wanted to initiate a war over financial assets. She was about to learn what a hostile corporate financial takeover actually looked like. I compiled Preston's Cayman Island routing numbers, the detailed crypto fraud ledgers, and the clearly forged Buckhead Mansion mortgage documents into a single highly classified data packet. With one decisive keystroke, I securely forwarded the entire dossier anonymously to my top-tier compliance contacts at the 3 major Wall Street investment firms currently backing Preston's legitimate domestic loans. By the time the markets opened in the morning, those massive firms would initiate mandatory risk audits, effectively freezing his accounts and choking off every single cent of his operational capital. But I was not finished. Destroying his cash flow was merely the preamble to my actual plan. I opened my private offshore investment portal, a diversified portfolio I had spent 10 years quietly and aggressively expanding, while my family assumed I was clipping coupons. I contacted my private wealth manager in Geneva via a secure encrypted channel with a highly specific, time-sensitive directive. I instructed him to immediately liquidate a calculated fraction of my highest-performing tech sector stocks. I then directed him to use that sudden influx of liquid capital to anonymously purchase the distressed debt bonds of Preston's failing condominium project through a proxy corporation I controlled. I was buying his toxic debt for pennies on the dollar before the news of his impending federal indictment even hit the local newspapers. The transaction processing bar on my screen loaded, filling with a bright green hue, until the confirmation receipt flashed across my monitor. It was done. I was no longer just the estranged, scapegoated sister-in-law that Preston despised. I was now his sole uncompromising institutional creditor. I owned the paper on his failing business. I owned the paper on his fraudulent high-interest loans. And by direct legal extension of the collateral he had so foolishly offered, I now owned the exclusive rights to seize my parents' beloved mansion the moment he defaulted. The dawn brought a fresh wave of agonizing stiffness to my lower spine, but the physical pain was entirely overshadowed by the sheer volume of notifications exploding on my private encrypted device. News travels with terrifying speed within Atlanta's elite African-American social circles, and my mother had weaponized that network with surgical precision. Vivian had clearly spent the last 48 hours making tearful, highly manipulative phone calls to every single member of her country club, her church committees, and the prestigious Jack and Jill organization. She was spinning a masterful narrative of a heartbroken mother dealing with a severely unhinged daughter. The voicemails piled up one after another, creating a suffocating chorus of unwarranted judgment and misdirected outrage. I sat on the edge of my rehabilitation bed, letting the audio messages play out loud while I strapped myself into my rigid medical brace. The first message was from Aunt Beatrice, a woman who had not bothered to call me on my birthday in 6 years. "Zuri," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "your mother is inconsolable. How dare you threaten your own flesh and blood with federal agents? We all know you have always been jealous of Jada, but trying to ruin her husband's business, because your own life is a mess, is a disgrace to this family's bloodline. You need to repent." The next voicemail was from Mrs. Carmichael, the regional director of my mother's social organization. "Zuri, I am calling you out of deep concern for the legacy of Black excellence we work so hard to uphold in this city. Your parents are pillars of our community. Preston provides jobs and development to our neighborhoods. By inviting the FBI into family matters over a petty financial misunderstanding, you are tearing down a successful Black family empire. You need to know your place. Drop this ridiculous complaint and handle this in-house before you embarrass all of us." The absolute irony of her statement made me laugh out loud in the empty room. They were fiercely protecting a white fraudster who had literally mortgaged their generational wealth behind their backs, all under the delusion that they were protecting Black excellence. Preston was actively destroying them, and they were treating him like a martyr while treating me like a traitor. I did not answer a single call. I did not issue a public statement to the church congregation to defend my name. I did not try to convince my aunts or my cousins that I was the actual victim. I simply let the voicemails pile up in my digital archive, saving every nasty message, every threat, and every demand that I drop my federal complaint. In the world of forensic auditing, silence is not weakness. Silence is data collection. My family and their social circle mistook my strategic silence for absolute terror. They thought the communal pressure was crushing me. They genuinely believed I was sitting in my supposedly cheap apartment, crying broke, physically incapacitated and desperate to be allowed back into their good graces. They were so incredibly wrong. On Wednesday morning, less than 24 hours before the Thanksgiving holiday, a uniformed courier arrived at the VIP desk of my high-security rehabilitation center. My private nurse brought a thick, cream-colored envelope into my suite, eyeing it with mild suspicion. It was sealed with an obnoxious, heavy gold wax stamp bearing Preston's initials. Inside was an invitation to the annual Thanksgiving dinner hosted this year at Preston and Jada's sprawling multi-million-dollar estate. But it was the handwritten note tucked inside the formal invitation from my mother, Vivian, that truly showcased the terrifying depth of her delusion. I unfolded the heavy cardstock and read her perfectly manicured handwriting. "Zuri, despite the psychotic episode you caused at the hospital, your father and I are willing to be the bigger people. We know you are struggling financially and mentally right now. We have saved a seat for you at the small table near the kitchen. Come to dinner tomorrow. Stand up in front of the whole family. Look your brother-in-law in the eye and formally apologize for your delusional accusations. If you drop this ridiculous federal complaint, we will find it in our hearts to forgive you. And Preston might even help you pay off your medical debts. Do not ruin this holiday. Be there at 5. I read the note twice to ensure I was not hallucinating. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman was spectacular. She had stolen my college fund while I was unconscious on an operating table, lied straight to the face of a federal agent, orchestrated a massive, coordinated smear campaign to destroy my professional and personal name, and now she was demanding a public apology to feed her arrogant son-in-law's fragile ego. They wanted me to bow down in front of the very people who had actively tried to ruin my life, all for a plate of turkey and the false promise of conditional forgiveness. I did not throw the invitation away. I placed it gently on my glass desk, right next to the encrypted flash drive containing the evidence of Preston's impending federal indictment. I pressed the intercom button on my bedside table and instructed my concierge to contact the most exclusive high-end private tailor in Buckhead. I told the concierge I needed an emergency fitting and I was willing to pay triple their absolute highest premium rate for a 24-hour turnaround. Money was no longer an object, and I had a very specific vision for my wardrobe. By noon, a team of 2 elite tailors was standing in my hospital suite measuring my frame with meticulous precision. I gave them explicit non-negotiable instructions. I needed a custom floor-length silk gown in a shade of deep, striking crimson red. I wanted the color of power, the color of an undeniable warning, and quite frankly, the color of blood. But more importantly, the dress needed to be a piece of structural engineering. It had to feature a reinforced structured bodice designed specifically to seamlessly conceal the bulky, rigid medical brace that was currently wrapping tightly around my recovering spine. I refused to walk into that mansion looking like a victim. I refused to limp. I refused to let them see a single ounce of physical weakness or pain. The dress had to act as a flawless, beautiful suit of armor. The tailors worked tirelessly, transforming the luxurious red fabric into a masterpiece that hugged my curves perfectly while rendering the thick medical brace underneath entirely invisible. As they pinned the final hem, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hospital suite. I looked at my reflection, taking in the sharp, cold determination burning in my own eyes. I was no longer the scapegoated daughter. I was the architect of their total destruction. I turned my head slightly, looking directly into the lens of the mirror, with a slow, chilling smile. They want me to show up and apologize. I let the cool, intoxicating satisfaction of my impending victory wash over me. No, I am not going there to apologize. I am going there to collect them. The tires of my chauffeur-driven Maybach crunched smoothly against the pristine gravel of Preston and Jada's sprawling Buckhead estate. The Thanksgiving holiday was in full swing, and their massive circular driveway was already choked with Mercedes sedans, Range Rovers and Porsche SUVs. Valets in crisp white shirts darted back and forth, scrambling to accommodate the influx of Atlanta's black elite. Church elders, prominent politicians, and Jack and Jill board members were all gathered inside, totally oblivious to the financial crater sitting right beneath their expensive Italian leather shoes. The chauffeur opened my door. I stepped out into the crisp November air. The custom crimson-red silk gown flowed perfectly around my frame, catching the ambient light of the estate's extravagant exterior chandeliers. The heavy, rigid medical brace fused to my lower spine was entirely invisible, hidden beneath the flawless structural tailoring of the bodice. I did not carry a cane. I did not limp. I stood at my full height, radiating the kind of absolute, untouchable power they thought they had stripped away from me in that hospital room. I walked through the towering, double mahogany front doors without bothering to knock. The grand foyer was packed with guests, sipping vintage champagne and exchanging hollow pleasantries. The moment I crossed the threshold, the ambient chatter in the room instantly died. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on the entire party. 50 pairs of eyes snapped in my direction. My mother Vivian was holding court near the grand staircase. She was wearing a completely over-the-top emerald green gown, laughing at a joke made by one of her wealthy socialite friends. When she saw me standing there, her jaw practically unhinged. Her crystal champagne flute slipped, spilling expensive wine across her manicured fingers. She expected a broken, weeping, wheelchair-bound daughter crawling back to beg for a plate of food and a scrap of forgiveness. Instead, she got me. My father Desmond nearly choked on his bourbon. He shoved past a group of deacons and grabbed my mother by the elbow, both of them staring at me as if I was a ghost who had just crashed their living room. Before they could formulate a coherent sentence to usher me out of sight, Preston made his grand entrance from the formal dining room. He looked every bit the arrogant, entitled white savior he believed himself to be, wearing a tailored navy blazer and a smug, self-satisfied smirk. He clinked a silver spoon against his glass, commanding the attention of every single influential guest in the room. Zuri Preston projected his voice loudly, making absolutely sure the church elders and business partners were listening to his display of manufactured grace. "Welcome back. I am honestly surprised you showed up, but I am glad you did. I hope your little timeout has taught you a valuable lesson about the consequences of turning against your own blood. We are a family of grace, and despite your financial struggles and your mental health issues, we forgive you. So please make yourself at home. Eat up, drink up, and try to enjoy yourself. Everything here tonight is completely on me." A polite, restrained murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. They looked at Preston with sheer admiration, praising him for being such a benevolent, forgiving brother-in-law to the supposedly unhinged, destitute black sheep of the family. My mother immediately seized the opportunity to control the narrative. She darted across the marble floor, grabbing my forearm with a grip so tight her nails dug into my skin. Her smile for the crowd was blindingly sweet, but her voice was a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "Do not you dare make a scene here tonight," Vivian hissed through gritted teeth. "We set up a place for you away from the main guests. You will sit there quietly, you will eat, and then you will stand up and apologize to Preston in front of everyone, just like I told you to." She tried to physically steer me away from the grand dining room. I glanced over to where she was pushing me. Tucked away in a dark, drafty corner near the swinging doors of the catering kitchen, completely isolated from the massive, beautifully decorated main dining table, was a flimsy card table. It had a single cheap folding chair, no floral centerpiece, and paper napkins, instead of the embroidered linen ones provided for the VIP guests. It was the ultimate physical manifestation of exactly where they believed I belonged. Hidden, silenced, and treated like an unwanted servant in a house my own money was about to repossess. I smoothly but forcefully ripped my arm out of my mother's grip. I did not say a single word to her. I simply adjusted the sleeve of my crimson gown and walked right past her. I bypassed the insulting folding table near the kitchen entirely. The crowd parted instinctively as I strode directly into the center of the formal dining room. The VIP table was a massive custom-built walnut masterpiece stretching 20 feet long, draped in imported silk runners, and covered in expensive crystal. Preston was standing at the absolute head of the table, ready to take his seat as the king of the castle. Jada was sitting to his right, glaring at me with wide, panicked eyes as I approached their sacred space. I did not ask for permission. I reached out, grabbed the heavy, ornate, velvet-lined chair directly at the opposite head of the VIP table, and dragged it back against the hardwood floor with a loud, deliberate scrape. I sat down, crossing my legs, elegantly smoothing the red silk of my dress over my knees. I folded my hands on the pristine white table runner and stared straight down the length of the table, locking eyes directly with Preston. The entire room was dead silent. The tension was so thick it was suffocating. My mother looked like she was about to have a medical emergency right there in the foyer. I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my intertwined fingers. My voice was calm, perfectly measured, and loud enough to carry to every single person hovering in the doorway. "I do not think you are in a position to pay for anything here tonight, Preston," I said, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with him. "Unless you plan to use that platinum business credit card that was declined by your bank exactly 15 minutes ago." Preston's face flushed a deep, violent shade of crimson that clashed horribly with his tailored navy blazer. The heavy crystal glasses on the VIP table rattled violently as he slammed his flat palm down against the polished walnut wood. The sharp, explosive sound echoed through the massive dining room, instantly silencing the few guests who were still murmuring. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated shock, his chest heaving as he tried to comprehend how a woman he considered entirely beneath his notice dared to speak to him with such profound disrespect in his own home. "What on earth are you barking about?" Preston snarled, his voice losing all of its previous polished, benevolent white savior charm. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger directly at my face, across the long expanse of the table. "You are completely delusional. You are standing in my house making up psychotic lies because you are broke, bitter, and jealous of everything we have built. My firm is thriving. In fact, my flagship luxury condominium project just received a massive $5 million funding package this very morning. The wire transfer is already clearing through the Federal Reserve as we speak. I am untouchable, and you are nothing but a pathetic liar trying to ruin a holiday." Jada immediately jumped up from her velvet dining chair to defend her husband. Her designer emerald silk gown rustled loudly in the quiet room as she moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with Preston. She looked out at the sea of shocked pastors, prominent politicians, and wealthy socialites, forcing a tight, panicked smile onto her face as she tried to salvage the situation. "Please excuse my sister, everyone," Jada announced, her voice pitched unnaturally high to mask her rising terror. "As my mother bravely shared with the congregation at church last Sunday, Zuri is suffering from a severe mental breakdown. The heavy painkillers from her recent back surgery have completely destroyed her grip on reality. She is standing here hallucinating about bank accounts and declined credit cards because she simply cannot handle the fact that Preston and I are building a real legacy while she has absolutely nothing to her name. She is just a bitter psycho woman obsessed with tearing down our success. Please pay no attention to her rambling." The wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of the prominent church elders exchanged highly judgmental glances, whispering behind their embroidered linen napkins. That was all it took to send my parents into a state of absolute frantic panic. The preservation of their flawless social image was their only religion, and I was currently setting their sacred altar on fire in front of their most important audience. "Security, my mother!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room like a jagged knife. She waved frantically toward the two burly, suited security guards standing near the grand foyer, her eyes wide with sheer desperation. "Get over here and remove her immediately. Drag her out the back door and throw her off the property right now. She is ruining Thanksgiving and humiliating this family." My father Desmond marched toward the head of the table, his face twisted in utter disgust. His authoritarian persona, the one he used to control our household for decades, was on full display. "You have done enough damage tonight, Zuri," he barked. "You are a complete embarrassment to this family. You walk into this house disrespecting your sister and the man who puts food on our table, all because you want a few minutes of desperate attention. Get out before I have you thrown out physically. We are done playing these childish games with you." The two massive security guards approached my chair, their heavy footsteps thudding against the hardwood floor. They reached out their large hands, fully intending to grab the shoulders of my custom crimson silk gown and forcefully drag me away from the dining table in front of 50 influential guests. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with my father. I sharply swatted the closest guard's hand away with such sudden force and absolute chilling authority that the massive man actually stepped back, visibly stunned by my complete lack of fear. "Do not touch me," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that carried perfectly through the silent, cavernous room. I stood up slowly from the velvet chair. I ensured that my posture was flawlessly straight, refusing to let the hidden medical brace dictate my movement or show even a fraction of physical weakness. I turned my gaze directly to my parents, letting them see the years of accumulated icy rage burning in my eyes. "Is this exactly how you want to play it, Desmond?" I asked deliberately, refusing to call him father. "You want to order hired security guards to physically drag me out in front of your wealthy friends to protect Jada's fragile ego. You want to silence me by force so you do not have to face the truth. Just like how you physically dragged me out of my own high school scholarship award ceremony when I was 18 years old. Do you all remember that day?" I looked around at the gathered guests, locking eyes with a few of my aunts and uncles, who suddenly looked very interested in their expensive shoes, avoiding my gaze entirely. "Let me remind the room!" I continued, projecting my voice clearly, so every single person in the mansion could hear the ugly truth of our family history. When I was 18, I was awarded a full-ride academic scholarship to a prestigious university. I had worked myself to the bone for years to earn that honor. I was standing in the school auditorium wearing my best dress, waiting for my name to be called to accept the highest award in my graduating class. But my parents dragged me out the back door by my wrists before I could even walk across the stage. Why? Because earlier that exact same afternoon, Jada had received her final college transcript showing she had failed out of her program entirely. My parents could not stand the thought of celebrating my success while their golden child was exposed as an academic failure. "You threw me into this back of your car and told me I was selfish and wicked for wanting to celebrate when my sister was hurting. You have spent my entire life hiding Jada's profound incompetence by actively humiliating, silencing, and burying me." The dining room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop against the marble floor. The pastors who had heavily praised my parents just hours earlier now stared at them with wide, questioning eyes. The shiny, untouchable veneer of the perfect black family was cracking right down the middle, and I was the one holding the hammer. "Shut up!" Jada screamed, her perfect facade shattering into millions of jagged pieces. "Nobody cares about your ancient history or your stupid scholarship. You are trespassing in my home. Preston, make them throw her out right now. I want her gone." Preston sneered, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive blazer as if to physically brush off the heavy weight of my words. He looked at me with that familiar, arrogant disdain, leaning his hands on the dining table. "You heard my wife. You are nothing but a jealous, crazy woman living in the past. You have no money, no power, and no place in this house. My $5 million funding package secured my legacy today while you are standing here shouting about high school. You are just a sad footnote in our success story. Now get out before I personally call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment." I smiled. It was not a defensive smile. It was the calm, terrifying smile of an apex predator who had just locked the cage door from the inside. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my heavily encrypted smartphone. Without breaking eye contact with Preston, I swiped across the screen, accessing the smart home network I had easily bypassed from the driveway minutes ago. "A $5 million funding package, Preston." I asked, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying a lethal, uncompromising edge. I tapped a single button on my screen, pairing my device via Bluetooth to the massive 80-inch flat-screen television mounted on the wall directly behind the VIP dining table. The screen flickered instantly, switching from a rotating display of staged family portraits to a live, high-resolution financial dashboard, displaying highly classified banking details and federal compliance alerts. "Let us take a very close look at that money," I said, pointing a manicured finger at the giant screen, illuminating the room behind him. "And let us see exactly who just signed the legal order to permanently freeze it." The massive 80-inch flat-screen television flashed brilliantly, casting a harsh, glaring white light over the perfectly roasted turkey, the expensive silver serving platters, and the elaborate crystal centerpieces lining the VIP table. Instead of the rotating gallery of staged, picture-perfect family vacation photos that had been playing moments before the display, now showed a highly classified, incredibly detailed financial dashboard. I tapped my smartphone screen one more time. High-resolution images of internal company emails, redacted bank statements from the Cayman Islands, and wire transfer receipts snapped into view. The date stamps were enormous and undeniable. The amounts were highlighted in glaring red text. The entire formal dining room erupted into a chaotic chorus of sharp gasps and frantic buzzing whispers. Deacons, politicians, and wealthy socialites alike squinted at the glaring screen, trying to process the sheer magnitude of the financial ruin being broadcast right in the middle of Preston and Jada's immaculate estate. I kept my eyes locked entirely onto Preston. His confident, arrogant posture was rapidly deteriorating into something that looked remarkably like pure terror. You see, Preston, I said, my voice cutting cleanly and effortlessly through the rising murmur of the crowd. $31,000 is a highly specific amount of money to steal from a woman actively bleeding on a surgical table. You and Jada sat in my hospital room and told my parents you desperately needed that exact amount to secure the closing costs on a luxury condominium project. You played the absolute victim. You manipulated their blind, unwavering loyalty to your white savior complex to justify robbing me blind while I was incapacitated. I took a slow step around the massive dining chair, commanding the attention of every single person in the room. But that money never went toward a down payment on any property. I pointed a manicured finger at the largest document currently displayed on the screen. The date of the hospital wire transfer matched perfectly with a corresponding deposit into a Cayman Islands shell company. I tracked that exact $31,000. You did not buy real estate. You routed those federal bait funds offshore to hide the trail, and then you immediately wired them to a disgraced zoning commissioner right here in Atlanta. My mother, Vivian, gripped the back of her velvet dining chair, looking as if the air had been physically punched out of her lungs. Her jaw hung open, her perfectly applied lipstick stark against her paling skin. Jada was shaking her head violently side to side, her hands clutching the fabric of her emerald gown, as if she could somehow physically hold her crumbling reality together. "It is a lie!" Jada shrieked, her voice cracking as she looked desperately at the wealthy guests surrounding them. "She is insane. She fabricated these documents to ruin us because she is jealous. Do not look at that screen." But the guests were no longer listening to Jada's hysterical defense. I tapped my screen again, bringing up the exact routing numbers and the digital signature attached to the bribe transfer. The signature matched Preston's, perfectly verified by 3 different digital forensic markers. "Dear brother-in-law," I continued, my tone dripping with absolute freezing courtesy. "You needed to pay that bribe to cover up the fact that your flagship cryptocurrency real estate project does not even possess basic structural permits. Taking stolen money across international borders to bribe a government official in order to save a fraudulent Ponzi scheme is not just a desperate, pathetic business move. In the eyes of the Federal Financial Intelligence Agency, that specific sequence of behavior is classified as international money laundering." The phrase money laundering hit the opulent dining room like a live grenade. The prominent local politicians who had been happily drinking Preston's expensive top-shelf bourbon suddenly set their crystal glasses down on the nearest tables, backing away as if the alcohol itself was suddenly toxic. The wealthy investors from our mega-church men, who had likely poured their own hard-earned capital into Preston's fake condominium projects, based on my father's glowing recommendations, physically took several steps backward. I watched with deep, satisfying validation as 3 different senior business partners pulled out their cell phones right there in the dining room, frantically dialing their private defense attorneys. Nobody wanted to be standing anywhere near a sinking ship, especially one currently being targeted by an active federal investigation. The grand illusion of Preston's brilliant, untouchable real estate empire was burning to ash right in front of the Atlanta elite, and the smoke was choking him. Preston realized he was losing absolutely everything in real time. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his complexion looking sickly and hollow. His hands shook violently as he stared at the damning, undeniable evidence glowing on his own television screen. "Turn it off," Preston bellowed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Turn that screen off right now, you absolute liar." He lunged across the edge of the dining table, knocking over a heavy crystal pitcher of ice water. It shattered violently against the hardwood floor, sending shards of glass and freezing water splashing across the expensive silk rugs. But he did not even register the destruction. He reached out with a desperate, aggressive swipe, lunging across the table to try and rip my encrypted smartphone right out of my hand to sever the Bluetooth connection. I did not flinch. I did not cower. I took a single calculated step back, letting his grasping hand swipe nothing but empty air. I slipped the phone safely into the hidden pocket of my custom crimson silk gown, standing my ground with flawless, unwavering posture. "You are insane!" Preston roared, his chest heaving as he stared at me with wild, unhinged eyes. His polished veneer was completely gone, replaced by the rabid desperation of a cornered criminal. Those are highly classified corporate files. Those are protected offshore accounts. You are a low-level data clerk. Where in the hell did you get the clearance to access my private financial records? I smoothed the front of my red dress, adjusting my shoulders to stand perfectly straight, despite the rigid medical brace hidden securely beneath the silk. I offered him a slow, chilling smile that radiated pure, undeniable power. I got access because you are incredibly careless with your digital security, Preston, I replied, my voice echoing loudly and clearly enough for the frantic dialing investors to hear every single syllable. But mostly, I got access because I am not a data entry clerk. I am the senior forensic financial auditor and director of cybersecurity for the exact Wall Street private equity firm that is currently acquiring your distressed, fraudulent company for pennies on the dollar. The absolute silence that followed my revelation was deafening. Preston physically staggered backward, hitting the edge of the mahogany serving buffet. He knocked over a silver gravy boat, but he did not even look down as the dark liquid stained the expensive Persian rug. His mouth opened and closed silently, his brain completely short-circuiting as he realized the penniless, broken woman he had been mocking was the exact corporate executive who currently held his entire fraudulent empire in the palm of her hand. But my mother Vivian could never accept defeat. Her entire existence was predicated on controlling the narrative, and she was watching her meticulously crafted reality shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Instead of feeling shame, she felt unhinged, defensive rage. Vivian lunged forward, pushing past a group of stunned church deacons. Her emerald green gown whipped around her ankles as she pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "You set him up!" Vivian shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet dining room like a siren. She completely ignored the fact that her son-in-law had just been exposed as an international money launderer. All she cared about was maintaining her delusional high ground. You deliberately set a trap for your own brother-in-law. That $31,000 was family money. It belonged to this household. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We had every right to use that fund to secure Jada and Preston's future. You are a wicked, spiteful daughter for calling federal agents over money that we were entitled to use. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply stared at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound clinical disgust. Family money. I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue with freezing precision. Is that what you call robbing your youngest daughter while her spine is actively bleeding on a surgical table? You think you were entitled to strip my bank accounts bare while I was unconscious, just to fund your favorite child's fake, glamorous lifestyle? I reached into the hidden pocket of my custom crimson silk gown and pulled out my smartphone. I did not set a trap for you, Vivian, I said smoothly, ensuring every single wealthy guest in the room was hanging on my every word. I am not the one who knew you were greedy enough to steal from your own flesh and blood. Someone else knew exactly who you were, and she planned for this exact moment years before she even passed away. I tapped a single button on my screen. On the massive 80-inch flat-screen television mounted behind the dining table, the damning financial dashboards and wire transfer receipts instantly vanished. The screen went black for a fraction of a second before a high-definition video file began to play. A collective, sharp gasp echoed through the room. Several of the older women in the crowd physically brought their hands to their mouths in shock. Sitting on the screen, looking vibrant, healthy, and draped in her signature pearls, was my late grandmother Hattie. Grandma Hattie was not just a family member. She was an absolute legend within the Atlanta Black elite. She was the brilliant, hard-working matriarch who had built our family's original wealth from the ground up through smart real estate investments and an ironclad work ethic in the 1970s. She was revered in the megachurch. She was respected by every politician in the room. And she was the only person in my family who had ever loved me unconditionally, who had seen through my parents' toxic obsession with status. On the screen, Grandma Hattie looked directly into the camera, her dark eyes sharp and entirely uncompromising. "Hello, Desmond. Hello, Vivian, Grandma." Hattie's voice echoed through the dining room, carrying the heavy, authoritative weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. If this video is currently playing, it means two things. It means I am no longer on this earth to protect Zuri, and it means you two have done exactly what I always knew you would do. My father Desmond froze completely. He looked as if all the blood had been instantly drained from his body. My mother Vivian clamped her hands over her ears for a brief second, unable to bear the sound of the woman who had always seen right through her shallow materialistic facade. I watched you two fawn over Jada for her entire life. Grandma Hattie continued on the video, her tone dripping with absolute disappointment. I watched you bend over backward for a white son-in-law who lacks basic respect, all while you pushed my brilliant, hard-working Zuri into the shadows. I knew that the second I passed away, you would try to bleed Zuri dry to fund your ridiculous fake lifestyle. The guests in the dining room were completely captivated. The pastors and deacons who had just listened to Vivian's tearful lying testimony at church days prior now stared at her with expressions of sheer, unadulterated revulsion. So I made a special arrangement. Grandma Hattie's voice rang out strong and clear. The $31,000 I left in that specific educational trust account was never meant to be spent. I specifically registered that account directly with the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Financial Intelligence Agency as a highly classified bait trust. I set up a digital perimeter. If anyone other than Zuri attempted to withdraw those funds while she was medically incapacitated or otherwise unable to defend herself, the system would immediately trigger a federal wire fraud alert. Grandma Hattie leaned forward on the screen, her gaze piercing right through the camera lens, pinning my parents to the floor. I knew you were nothing but well-dressed thieves, Grandma Hattie stated, delivering the final fatal blow to my parents' reputation. I knew you would wait until Zuri was at her absolute most vulnerable to strike. So I left a mousetrap right in the middle of the room. And you just snapped it shut on your own greedy fingers. May God have mercy on you, because the federal government certainly will not. The video feed cut to black. The silence in the grand dining room was suffocating. The social execution was absolute and instantaneous. My parents had spent their entire lives treating their social standing as their religion. They worshipped at the altar of public opinion. And in less than 3 minutes, I had systematically dismantled their entire universe. I watched the profound, brutal shift happen in real time. The wealthy socialites who regularly invited Vivian to their exclusive luncheons actively took steps backward, physically distancing themselves from her. A prominent city councilman pulled his wife by the arm, steering her towards the front door to leave immediately. My father Desmond, desperate to salvage any remaining shred of his dignity, reached out to a senior church elder he had known for 20 years. Brother Thomas Desmond pleaded, his voice shaking with humiliation. Please, you must understand, this is a terrible misunderstanding. The church elder looked at my father with utter contempt. He did not say a single word. He simply turned his back and walked away. Vivian was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she realized that she was no longer the queen of Atlanta high society. She was a publicly exposed thief who had just been condemned from the grave by her own highly respected mother-in-law. The social isolation she had tried to force upon me at the hospital was now her permanent, inescapable reality. But Jada, the golden child, could not process the social dynamics. She only cared about her material possessions. She looked at her husband, Preston, who was still leaning against the buffet table, sweating profusely, and staring blankly at the dark television screen. Jada realized the money was gone. She realized the prestige was gone. But her mind frantically clung to the one physical asset she thought she still controlled. Jada stomped her foot against the hardwood floor, tears of absolute panic streaming down her perfectly contoured face. She pointed an aggressive finger at me, her voice shrill and desperate. "You ruined my husband's business," Jada sobbed, clutching the fabric of her expensive dress. "You humiliated my parents in front of all our friends. You called the federal agents on us. But you cannot touch everything we have built. This mansion belongs to us, me and Preston. We hold the deed to this multi-million-dollar estate. You can freeze the bank accounts, but you cannot take my house from me. I will not let you take my home." I stood at the head of the dining table, enveloped in my custom crimson gown, feeling the solid, painless support of my medical brace beneath the silk. I looked at my sister, taking in her sheer breathtaking ignorance. I did not yell, I did not sneer. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the dining room. It was the sound of a woman who had spent 30 years being told she was nothing, finally standing at the absolute summit of her power. My laughter echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the formal dining room, cutting through the thick, suffocating tension like a freshly sharpened blade. I did not laugh because the situation was humorous. I laughed because the sheer blinding magnitude of Jada's ignorance was truly something to behold. She stood there in her expensive emerald gown, trembling with manufactured outrage, clutching her pearls while aggressively defending a kingdom made entirely of quicksand. She genuinely believed that a piece of paper with her name on it made her untouchable. She believed her status as a wealthy married socialite was a permanent shield against reality. I stopped laughing, letting the sound abruptly die in my throat. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. From the shadows of the grand foyer, my executive assistant Naomi stepped forward into the glaring light of the dining room. She was impeccably dressed in a sharp black suit, carrying a massive, heavy leather-bound legal portfolio. She walked past the stunned church elders, past the whispering politicians, and approached the VIP table. Without a single word, Naomi placed the thick portfolio directly onto the pristine white table runner right in front of my plate, before silently retreating to the perimeter of the room. "You honestly believe you own this mansion, Jada?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that somehow carried to every single corner of the sprawling estate. "You think signing a deed 3 years ago made you the permanent queen of Buckhead. You think your marriage is a fortress." I reached out and flipped open the heavy leather cover of the portfolio. Inside was a mountain of heavily notarized, deeply incriminating financial documents. I pulled out a thick stack of papers stapled together with a bright red legal binding. I tossed the stack carelessly down the center of the table. The papers slid across the polished walnut wood, coming to a dead stop right next to Preston's trembling hands. "Let me educate you on how predatory lending actually works," I said, maintaining absolute unblinking eye contact with my sister. 3 months ago, when Preston's fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme began collapsing under the weight of its own lies, he realized he could not secure a legitimate bank loan to cover his tracks. No reputable financial institution in this country would touch his toxic ledgers. So he went to a shadow lending syndicate, a predatory, unregulated credit organization that caters specifically to desperate failing men who cannot pass a standard compliance audit. To secure a $1.5 million emergency cash injection, Preston quietly put this exact multi-million-dollar estate up as collateral. "He mortgaged your massive dream house right out from under your feet, Jada." Jada stared at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate denial. She looked down at the documents resting on the table, then snapped her head toward her husband. Preston was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he stared at the red legal binding like it was a venomous snake. "That is a lie." Jada screamed, her voice cracking as she tried to physically shake her husband's arm. "Tell her it is a lie, Preston. My name is on the original deed. You cannot take out a second mortgage on this property without my legal consent and my signature." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, offering her a cold, pitying smile. "He forged your signature, sweet sister," I said softly. "Just like he forged the digital authorization on my hospital bed. He completely bypassed you because he does not respect you. He views you as a convenient prop, a wealthy black wife to give him social credibility in Atlanta while he robs your community blind." Jada stumbled backward, releasing Preston's arm, as if his custom-tailored suit had suddenly caught fire. She covered her mouth with both hands, a muffled, agonizing sob tearing from her throat. The illusion of her perfect elite marriage disintegrated in front of 50 wealthy guests. But I was not finished. The true devastation had not even begun. I turned my freezing gaze away from my weeping sister and locked eyes directly with my father. Desmond was still standing near the edge of the table, his face pale and drawn, trying to process the profound humiliation of Grandma Hattie's video message. He thought the public destruction of his social standing was the absolute worst thing that could happen to him tonight. He was completely wrong. You see, Desmond? I continued, my voice ringing out with merciless clarity. $1.5 million is a massive amount of cash to secure from a shadow lender. This house alone, especially with the fluctuating property values in this zip code, did not cover the full risk margin the syndicate demanded. Preston needed additional debt-free collateral to finalize his shady loan. And since his own wealthy white family cut him off years ago for his reckless gambling habits, he had to go looking for the easiest, most blindly trusting targets he could find. I reached into the leather portfolio again and pulled out a second, smaller stack of legal documents. I slid them slowly down the smooth surface of the dining table, aiming them directly at my father. "Take a very good look at the bottom of page 4, Desmond Y. commanded. That is the original property deed to the ancestral family home. The house where you and Vivian host your prestigious charity dinners. The house you loudly claim is the ultimate symbol of our proud family legacy. Preston forged both of your signatures. He leveraged your fully paid-off property to secure his illegal loan. He handed the keys to your entire generational wealth over to a criminal syndicate just to buy himself a few more months of pretending to be a successful developer." The color vanished entirely from Desmond's face, leaving him looking ashen and suddenly very, very old. His hands shook violently as he reached out and picked up the heavy legal document. His eyes darted across the page, scanning the text until they landed on the forged signatures at the bottom. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered backward, his breathing turning into sharp, ragged gasps. He clutched the fabric of his expensive suit right over his heart, his knees buckling beneath him. He hit the edge of a dining chair and collapsed heavily into the seat. The psychological weight of his own profound failure was crushing him in real time. He had spent his entire life pushing his brilliant black daughter into the shadows, all so he could worship a mediocre white con artist who used his racial privilege to literally steal the roof over their heads. Vivian shrieked, rushing to Desmond's side. She grabbed his arm, shaking him frantically before turning her venomous glare toward Preston. "Tell me she is lying!" My mother howled, her emerald gown twisting around her legs. "Tell me you did not put our home in jeopardy. We gave you everything. We treated you like a king." Preston did not say a single word. He did not defend himself. He did not apologize to the wife he had betrayed or the in-laws he had bankrupted. He looked around the grand dining room, his eyes darting frantically from the furious faces of the wealthy investors to the weeping faces of his family. He saw the absolute terrifying reality of his situation. The illusion was completely shattered. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary for multiple counts of wire fraud, international money laundering, and identity theft. Preston decided to run. He turned on his heel, abandoning all pretense of dignity, and bolted. He sprinted past the shocked church deacons, his heavy shoes pounding against the hardwood floor. He knocked over a tall tray of crystal champagne glasses, sending shattered glass flying across the room as he made a desperate, cowardly dash for the heavy French doors leading out to the lavish rear patio and the driveway beyond. He grabbed the polished brass handles and shoved his entire body weight against the glass. The doors did not budge. Preston shoved again, grunting in panic, his face red and sweating. He pressed his face against the glass pane, peering out into the darkness of the patio. Standing on the other side of the glass, looking in with absolute terrifying calm, were 3 towering men in tactical black suits. My private corporate security team, working in direct tandem with federal authorities. I had instructed them to quietly secure every single exit on the property the exact moment I sat down at the VIP table. Preston was completely trapped. He backed away from the locked doors, panting heavily. His expensive blazer wrinkled and disheveled. He slowly turned around to face the dining room, realizing there was nowhere left to run and no one left to manipulate. I was completely unfazed by his pathetic escape attempt. I remained seated at the head of the table, the picture of absolute unbothered control. I casually reached for a crystal glass of expensive red wine that a caterer had poured earlier in the evening. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the chaotic, screaming reality of the room settle into a manageable hum. I looked at Jada, who was now weeping openly on the floor, and then at my father, who was clutching his chest in sheer, silent devastation. Finally, I locked eyes with the trembling cornered man standing near the patio doors. Here is the most fascinating thing about high-risk predatory lending syndicates, I said, my voice cutting sharply through the sounds of my mother's sobbing. Shadow credit organizations absolutely despise federal heat. When my Wall Street compliance audits triggered the global banking alerts this morning, that lending syndicate panicked. They realized they were holding the toxic debt of a man currently being hunted by the Federal Financial Intelligence Agency. So they immediately put your $1.5 million debt portfolio up for a fire sale to liquidate their exposure before the government could seize their assets. I took another slow sip of the rich red wine, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. My eyes never left Preston's terrified, pale face. That syndicate sold your entire debt portfolio to a private corporate holding company at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, I said smoothly, lowering the crystal glass back to the table. And guess who is the sole uncompromising proprietor of that holding company? It is me. I stated the 3 words with a chilling finality that seemed to instantly drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I reached back into the heavy leather portfolio my assistant Naomi had placed in front of me. I pulled out the final heavily embossed stack of legal documents and slammed the debt transfer certificates directly onto the center of the VIP dining table. The loud smack of paper hitting polished wood made Jada physically jump out of her chair. I am the sole owner of the corporate entity that just purchased every single cent of Preston's toxic debt. I projected my voice, ensuring the wealthy politicians and church elders, standing frozen in the foyer, heard every single syllable. I am now the primary creditor of this ridiculous multi-million-dollar mansion. I am the primary creditor of the ancestral family home in Buckhead. I did not just come here tonight to take back my stolen $31,000. I came here to take absolutely everything you are standing on. You handed the keys to your entire kingdom to a white con artist who treated you like stepping stones, and now I own the ground beneath your feet. My father. Desmond's face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. He gripped the edge of the dining table, his knuckles turning white as he tried to summon the authoritarian power he had lorded over me for my entire life. You cannot do this to us! Desmond bellowed, his voice cracking with blind desperation. We are your parents. We gave you life. You are going to sign those properties back over to us right now, or I swear to God, Zuri, I will destroy you. You have nothing left to destroy me with, Desmond, I replied, standing tall in my custom crimson gown. You spent 30 years trying to break my spirit so Jada could shine. You let Preston leverage your generational wealth because you were too obsessed with his proximity to whiteness and power to read a basic loan agreement. You literally played yourself. Realizing that threats were entirely useless, my mother, Vivian, completely broke character. The proud image-obsessed matriarch of the Atlanta social scene crumbled in front of 50 influential guests. She dropped her designer clutch. It hit the hardwood floor, spilling expensive cosmetics everywhere. Vivian actually fell to her knees right there in the formal dining room, the heavy emerald silk of her dress pooling around her legs. She clasped her manicured hands together, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Zuri, please! Vivian sobbed thick tears, ruining her flawless makeup, as the church deacons watched her in absolute horror. Please, baby. We are family. You are my daughter. We made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. You cannot throw your own mother and father out on the street. Where will we go? We will lose everything we have built. Have some mercy. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I looked down at the woman kneeling before me, the woman who had stripped my bank accounts bare while I was physically paralyzed. I stepped around the dining table and stood directly over her. I leaned down, keeping my posture perfectly straight to accommodate my hidden medical brace, and looked right into her weeping eyes. My voice was colder than winter ice. Do you remember the text message you sent to Desmond while I was lying face down on a surgical table? I asked softly, watching the color drain completely from her face. You stood right outside my recovery room. You typed the words, Do it now before the little brat wakes up. You pushed send, and you stole my future without a second thought. You did not care if I ended up bankrupt, homeless, or crippled by medical debt. You only cared about funding Jada's grand illusion. I straightened back up, towering over her. You do not get to invoke the word family to save your skin. Family died the exact second you hit send on that message. You are just a thief sitting in a house that I currently own. Jada was hyperventilating on the floor next to her mother. You are a monster! Jada shrieked, burying her face in her hands, as her perfect Thanksgiving dinner turned into a financial crime scene. You planned this just to ruin my holiday. You are a cold, heartless monster. I am a forensic financial auditor. I corrected her sharply. I just audited your entire life, Jada, and you came up completely bankrupt. You spent your whole life relying on mom and dad to steal my light so you could glow. Now you are married to a federal criminal, your house belongs to the sister you bullied, and your parents are going to be living in a motel. That is not me being a monster. That is just mathematics. Preston was still backed against the locked patio doors. He was sweating through his tailored navy blazer, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for any possible avenue of escape. He had tried to manipulate a powerful black family, and he had successfully destroyed them, but he had severely miscalculated the quiet sister sitting in the corner. He realized he was the one who was about to take the heaviest fall. The shadow lending syndicate was no longer his problem. I was his problem, and I was not going to negotiate. I can get the money back, Preston stammered, holding his hands up defensively as he looked at the wealthy investors who had previously backed his projects. Several of them turned their backs on him in absolute disgust. Zuri, listen to me. I have other projects in the pipeline. I have foreign investors. If you just give me a 60-day extension on the debt, I can liquidate a few assets and pay you back with a 20% interest premium. We can handle this like civilized business partners. We are not business partners, Preston, I said, offering him a sharp, merciless smile. You are a fraudulent con artist who married into my family to find easy marks. You used my sister's raging insecurity to gain access to my parents' bank accounts. You thought you could operate with total impunity because you assumed your arrogance made you the smartest person in the room, but you forgot one crucial detail. I track financial predators for a living. You left a digital trail so wide and so careless that a first-year compliance intern could have flagged you for international money laundering. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but the words completely died in his throat. A sudden deafening wail pierced through the thick tension of the dining room. The piercing, unmistakable shriek of heavy police sirens echoed from the bottom of the estate's long gravel driveway. The sound multiplied, growing louder and more intense by the second, as multiple vehicles rushed up toward the mansion. Bright, aggressive flashes of red and blue lights suddenly sliced through the darkness outside, illuminating the tall glass windows of the dining room and casting frantic, spinning shadows across the terrified faces of my family. The heavy mahogany double doors at the front of the estate did not just open, they were practically blown off their hinges. A massive swarm of tactical boots pounded against the imported marble floor of the grand foyer. Men and women wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow letters reading FBI and IRS, criminal investigation, flooded into the mansion. The wealthy guests who had been paralyzed by my financial presentation now scrambled frantically out of the way. Deacons dropped their champagne flutes and socialites pressed themselves flat against the expensive silk wallpaper to avoid the rushing tide of federal agents. Walking calmly through the exact center of the tactical chaos was Agent Sterling. He was not wearing his standard gray suit tonight. He wore a heavy tactical vest and an expression of absolute uncompromising authority. He marched straight into the formal dining room, completely ignoring the extravagant Thanksgiving feast spread across the long walnut table. His eyes locked directly onto the corner of the room where my private corporate security team still had Preston pinned firmly against the locked patio doors. Preston, Agent Sterling's voice boomed, carrying the full, terrifying weight of the federal government. You are under arrest for international money laundering, multiple counts of federal wire fraud, and the gross forgery of financial documents. Preston completely lost whatever remained of his mind. The arrogant, wealthy white developer who had spent years treating my black family like a disposable stepping stone suddenly transformed into a screaming, thrashing toddler. He flailed his arms wildly, kicking at the thick glass doors and shouting that he knew the mayor, that he had powerful lawyers, that this was all a massive misunderstanding orchestrated by a jealous, vindictive sister-in-law. The federal agents did not care about his elite connections. Two massive agents grabbed Preston by his tailored navy blazer, spun him around roughly and slammed him face first against the reinforced glass of the patio doors. The loud smack echoed sharply through the dining room. Preston shrieked in pain as they twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp, unmistakable clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like absolute music to my ears. They dragged him backward away from the glass. His expensive Italian shoes scrambled uselessly against the hardwood floor. He was crying now. Actual tears of pure terror streamed down his red, sweaty face as they frog marched him straight through the center of the dining room. The church elders and wealthy investors watched in sheer disgust as the so-called visionary developer was paraded out of the house like a common street thief. My mother, Vivian, let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief. She pressed a manicured hand to her chest, foolishly believing that the federal raid was solely focused on her son-in-law. She stepped forward, trying to summon her usual manipulative charm. She attempted to address Agent Sterling, as if they were casually chatting at a Sunday church service, completely blind to the reality of her own situation. "Thank goodness you arrived," Officer Vivian lied smoothly, gesturing toward the front doors where Preston had just been dragged out into the night. "That man deceived all of us. He took advantage of our family's good name and pristine reputation. We had absolutely no idea he was a criminal. We are just innocent victims in his terrible scheme." Agent Sterling slowly turned his gaze away from the doorway and locked eyes with my mother. He did not smile. He did not offer a single ounce of comfort. He simply reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a second set of folded legal warrants. "Vivian and Desmond, Agent Sterling," said, his voice dropping to a chilling professional register that silenced the entire room. "You are not victims in this scenario. You are active co-conspirators." My father, Desmond, froze. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. "What are you talking about?" Desmond stammered, stepping backward until his spine hit the edge of the dining table. "We did not launder any money. We are upstanding citizens. I am a respected leader in this community." Agent Sterling took a commanding step closer, towering over my parents. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and the unauthorized breach of a federally monitored bait trust. You actively conspired to steal $31,000 from an incapacitated patient while she was undergoing major spinal surgery, and you utilized a false identity to facilitate that illegal transfer across state lines. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs right now." Vivian let out a blood-curdling scream. It was not a scream of sorrow or genuine remorse. It was a scream of pure, absolute humiliation. The elite members of her social clubs, the very women she had spent decades trying to desperately impress, were standing mere feet away watching her get arrested for petty theft. She tried to fight back, swatting aggressively at the female federal agent who approached her with handcuffs ready. "Do not touch me!" Vivian shrieked, her emerald gown twisting around her legs as she struggled against the agent's firm grip. "I am a senior committee member. I am a pillar of the church. You cannot do this to me in front of my important guests. Zuri, tell them to stop. Tell them it was all a terrible mistake. You have to fix this right now." I stood perfectly still in my crimson silk gown. I held her panicked gaze with absolute freezing ice. "I told you I was going to collect you, Vivian," I said softly, ensuring my voice carried over her frantic struggling. "The federal government is just here to facilitate the final transaction." The female agent forcefully grabbed my mother's wrists, pinning them behind her back and securing the heavy steel cuffs. The click echoed through the room, sealing her fate. My father did not fight. Desmond simply hung his head in sheer profound defeat. He held his trembling hands out as an agent cuffed him. The powerful authoritarian patriarch of the family had been reduced to a silent, broken criminal in a matter of seconds. They were both escorted out of the dining room, walking the exact same public walk of shame their precious son-in-law had taken moments before. With Preston, Vivian, and Desmond gone, the massive dining room suddenly felt incredibly empty. The only sound left in the mansion was the frantic, hyperventilating sobs of my older sister. Jada was still kneeling on the floor near the head of the table. She had not been arrested. She had been far too incompetent and too intentionally blind to be considered a mastermind in Preston's elaborate financial crimes. The federal agents did not want her. But as she looked around the ruined dining room, she quickly realized that avoiding a prison cell was actually the worst possible outcome for her. Because without Preston, without her parents' stolen money, and without the fake real estate empire to shield her, she was left holding an empty bag filled entirely with massive, crushing debt. Jada crawled across the expensive Persian rug. She scrambled toward me on her hands and knees, completely abandoning her superior golden child persona. She reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the bottom hem of my custom crimson gown. She looked up at me, her flawless makeup completely ruined by her tears, her face a mask of pure terror. "Zuri, please," Jada begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "You have to help me. They are going to take absolutely everything. Preston is going to a federal prison. I have no job. I have no money of my own. You own the debt on this house. You own the debt on Mom and Dad's house. You have millions of dollars in your corporate accounts. You can pay off the shadow syndicate. You can wipe the slate clean and save our family. Please, I am your sister. Do not leave me out on the street with nothing." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making sure I felt entirely worthless. I looked at the sister who had mocked my academic achievements, who had laughed when my parents dragged me out of my own high school award ceremony, and who had gleefully planned to steal my inheritance while I was bleeding on a surgical table. I did not yell at her. I did not gloat or rub her face in the dirt. I simply took a slow, deliberate step backward. The smooth, expensive crimson silk of my gown slipped effortlessly out of her desperate, grasping fingers. "You are not left with nothing, Jada," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal finality. "You are left with exactly what you earned. You wanted this massive mansion. You wanted the prestigious title of a wealthy developer's wife. You wanted the luxury lifestyle so badly that you never bothered to ask how it was being funded. Well, congratulations, you get to keep the title. Enjoy paying back the $1.5 million you owe my holding company. I expect your first minimum payment installment by the end of the month, or I will initiate the eviction process immediately." Jada collapsed fully onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into the rug as the absolute reality of her ruined life finally crushed her. I did not look at her again. I turned my attention away from my shattered family and looked out at the sea of wealthy guests, politicians and church elders, who were still standing frozen in the grand foyer. They were staring at me with a mixture of profound shock and deep, unmistakable fear. They had arrived at this estate expecting to feast on a Thanksgiving turkey and celebrate a powerful real estate family. Instead, they had just witnessed a complete, ruthless, and highly calculated financial execution. I smoothed the front of my dress, ensuring my posture remained perfectly straight, commanding the entire room with absolute, unwavering authority. "The Thanksgiving dinner is over," I announced to the petrified crowd, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear precision. "Everyone, please vacate my property." 3 days later, the sterile, blinding fluorescent lights of the Federal Detention Center in downtown Atlanta provided a jarring contrast to the warm, ambient glow of the crystal chandeliers from Thanksgiving night. I sat perfectly still in the center of the cold steel visitor's booth. I wore a tailored, sharp ivory blazer. My posture was completely rigid and unyielding, fully supported by the medical brace hidden beneath the pristine fabric. The heavy, reinforced metal door on the opposite side of the room buzzed loudly. A female guard escorted my mother into the room. Vivian was completely unrecognizable. The designer emerald silk gown, the flawless makeup, and the perfectly maintained socialite aura had been entirely stripped away. She was drowning in a standard-issue drab orange jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back haphazardly, and the deep, exhausted lines on her face were finally visible for the world to see. Yet despite having lost absolutely everything, the toxic manipulative pride that fueled her entire existence remained perfectly intact. She sat down hard on the metal stool across from me. She leaned forward, glaring at me with a profound, simmering hatred. "I knew you would come," Vivian spat, her voice trembling, but laced with that familiar commanding arrogance. "I knew your conscience would eat you alive. You are going to burn in hell for what you did to your own flesh and blood, Zuri. You threw your own mother and father into a concrete cage. You humiliated us in front of our entire congregation. The Lord sees your wickedness. You need to call those federal agents right now and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you gave us permission to use that money. If you fix this today, I might still find it in my heart to forgive you." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at the woman sitting across from me, studying her frantic, desperate performance with absolute clinical detachment. "I did not come here to seek your forgiveness, Vivian," I said smoothly, keeping my tone freezing and measured. "I came here because my corporate attorneys advised me to formally notify you of the asset seizures." Vivian's eyes widened, the false bravado instantly slipping from her face. "Asset seizures," she whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the steel table. I opened my designer leather tote and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the cold metal surface toward her. "My legal team filed the official eviction notice for Jada at 8 o'clock this morning," I stated clearly, "since her husband is currently sitting in a federal holding cell with his assets entirely frozen. She has absolutely no way to pay the debt she owes my holding company. Jada has exactly 48 hours to pack her bags and vacate my property. She is completely bankrupt. And since you and Desmond fraudulently leveraged your own home to fund Preston's criminal enterprise, the bank is foreclosing on the ancestral estate by the end of the week. You have no house to return to." Vivian stared at the eviction notice, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, slamming her fists against the table. "She is your sister. We are your family. You are leaving us with nothing. We will not even have a roof over our heads when we get out of here." "You are not getting out of here anytime soon," I corrected her calmly. "Your trial begins next week. Because you and Desmond actively participated in international wire fraud and identity theft to breach a federally monitored trust, the judge has officially denied your bail. There is no money left to save you. There are no wealthy church elders coming to your rescue. Every single person you spent decades trying to impress watched you get arrested for petty theft. You are completely on your own." Tears of genuine, absolute terror finally spilled down Vivian's face. The realization that her manipulation tactics were entirely useless against me broke her completely. She reached her shaking hands across the table, trying to grab my wrists. "Zuri, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate wail. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I am begging you. Do not leave me in this place. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything." I calmly pulled my hands back, folding them neatly in my lap. I looked deeply into her tear-streaked face, searching for any trace of maternal love, any ounce of genuine remorse. There was nothing there. Just the raw, animalistic panic of a cornered thief who had finally been caught. "You are not sorry you stole from me while my spine was sliced open," I said softly, my voice carrying a lethal finality. "You are only sorry that the trap snapped shut on your own fingers. I did not come here today to gloat. I did not come here to yell at you. I came here because I needed to look you in the eyes one last time. I needed to see exactly what the face of a thief looks like when the mask is permanently ripped off." I stood up slowly, buttoning my ivory blazer with flawless, unbothered precision. I turned my back on the woman who had spent my entire life trying to break my spirit. "You cannot just walk away from me!" Vivian screamed, her voice echoing wildly against the concrete walls. "I am your mother. You come back here. Zuri." I walked toward the heavy metal exit door without looking back. The guard pulled it open for me. As I stepped through the threshold, Vivian threw herself against the reinforced glass partition, separating the visitor booths, pounding her fists aggressively against the thick pane. The muffled, frantic thudding of her hands against the glass grew fainter and weaker with every step I took down the long, sterile corridor. I pushed through the final set of heavy double doors and stepped out into the crisp, brilliant Atlanta morning. The bright, blinding sunlight washed over my face, warming my skin. I took a deep, unrestricted breath of fresh air. For the first time in 30 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations was completely gone. I was entirely free. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding inevitability, but when the hammer finally fell, it shattered Preston's world with absolute, breathtaking precision. He stood in the heavily guarded federal courthouse, wearing a shapeless standard-issue beige jumpsuit, looking like a hollow ghost of the man who had confidently poured champagne at his extravagant Thanksgiving dinner. His high-priced defense attorney tried every manipulative trick in the legal playbook to save him. He tried to claim Preston was merely a victim of a volatile, unpredictable real estate market. He attempted to leverage his family's historical influence and generational wealth in the city to garner sympathy. But my forensic audit was entirely bulletproof. The digital trail of international money laundering, the offshore shell accounts in the Cayman Islands, and the meticulously forged property deeds left no room for reasonable doubt. The federal judge looked down from the bench with absolute, undisguised disgust, explicitly condemning the sheer predatory nature of bribing city officials while actively bleeding a minority family dry. Preston's own wealthy white relatives, the ones he had bragged about for years, did not even bother to show up to the sentencing hearing. They completely abandoned him to protect their own corporate interests. He was sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. I sat in the back row of the gallery, my posture flawlessly straight, watching the arrogant developer break down into violent, breathless sobs as the armed bailiffs dragged him out of the courtroom. He was stripped of his titles, his stolen wealth, and his freedom in a matter of minutes. With Preston locked away and all his personal and corporate assets seized by the federal government to pay off the deeply defrauded investors, Jada was left entirely exposed to the harsh, unforgiving reality she had spent her entire life desperately avoiding. My legal team executed the eviction order with zero hesitation. Jada had exactly 48 hours to clear out of the multi-million-dollar Buckhead mansion she had paraded around like a royal palace. My private security team watched silently from the driveway as my former golden child sister dragged black garbage bags full of rapidly depreciating designer clothes to a battered rented sedan. She had no college degree because my parents had covered up her academic failures. She had no marketable skills, and she had absolutely no wealthy friends willing to take her in. The elite women she used to host for lavish Sunday brunches blocked her phone number the exact day Preston was arrested. Today, Jada works as a cashier at a discount grocery store on the far outskirts of the city. She spends 8 grueling hours a day standing on her feet scanning barcodes, constantly pulling her uniform visor down in sheer terror that someone from her old country club might walk through the sliding glass doors and recognize her. The crushing weight of the massive debt she owes my holding company guarantees she will be living paycheck to paycheck for the rest of her natural life. She traded her soul for a fake kingdom, and now she is paying the ultimate humiliating price. But the most spectacular, devastating downfall belonged to Desmond and Vivian. Their trial became an absolute media spectacle that thoroughly entertained the same Atlanta elite they had tried so desperately to impress for decades. My parents stood before a federal judge and attempted to use their advancing age and their supposed religious devotion as a shield to deflect their guilt. They wept openly, they begged the court for mercy, and they claimed they were simply trying to protect their family legacy during a moment of financial panic. The judge saw right through their pathetic manipulation. He delivered a scathing reprimand, explicitly condemning them for exploiting a federally protected trust fund and for ruthlessly preying on their own daughter while she was physically incapacitated by major spinal surgery. They were handed a 3-year sentence in a federal correctional facility, but the prison sentence was not their true punishment. Their real agonizing punishment was their absolute social death. The megachurch they had attended for decades publicly and fiercely denounced them. The board of directors actually hired contractors to pry the brass donor plaques bearing my parents' names off the sanctuary walls. Their prestigious social organizations formally revoked their memberships via certified mail. Desmond and Vivian lost their freedom, but more importantly, they lost their audience. I heard from my lawyers that Vivian tried to use her designated prison phone calls to reach out to her old socialite friends, only to be hung up on the second she stated her name. They became the ultimate cautionary tale, permanently exiled and entirely erased from the high society they worshipped. Once the criminal trials concluded and the sentences were handed down, I moved swiftly and mercilessly to liquidate the physical remnants of their toxic legacy. I hired a premier luxury real estate firm to put both the Buckhead Mansion and my parents' ancestral home on the open market. Because the properties were located in highly sought-after zip codes, a fierce bidding war erupted almost immediately. Within 30 days, both sprawling estates were sold for straight cash to out-of-state corporate buyers who had absolutely no connection to our family drama and no knowledge of the crimes committed within those walls. I stood on the sidewalk across the street sipping a hot coffee as I watched the moving trucks clear out the heavy mahogany furniture, the crystal chandeliers, and the expensive oil paintings my parents had bought solely to project an image of untouchable wealth. When the final closing documents were officially signed, a massive influx of clean, legitimate capital flooded directly into my corporate holding accounts. I did not use a single cent of it to buy designer clothes, diamond watches, or flashy sports cars. I had a much grander, far more permanent vision for the money my family had tried to use to destroy me. I purchased a sleek, modern 4-story commercial building right in the bustling heart of downtown Atlanta. I hired top-tier architects to gut the interior, designing brilliant open-concept workspaces, state-of-the-art technology labs, and highly collaborative conference rooms enclosed in soundproof glass. I used the millions of dollars acquired from the sale of my family's stolen properties to officially establish the Hattie Innovation Trust. It was a fully funded financial incubator and professional grant program dedicated exclusively to supporting young, brilliant Black women, launching their own independent careers in technology finance and cybersecurity. I created a sanctuary where ambitious women would receive the high-level mentorship, the initial seed capital, and the aggressive legal protection they needed to build their own empires without ever having to rely on predatory lenders, biased corporate ladders, or toxic, unsupportive family dynamics. I took the blinding greed and manipulation that destroyed my parents and transformed it into a powerful living engine for true generational wealth. A gentle, cool breeze sweeps through the busy city street as I stand on the pristine sidewalk, looking up at the polished glass facade of my newly opened building. The gleaming silver letters above the main entrance spell out my grandmother's name, catching the bright, brilliant afternoon sunlight. I adjust the cuffs of my tailored blazer, feeling the solid, painless strength of my fully healed spine. I do not need a medical brace anymore, just as I no longer need the validation of people who never truly loved me. I am no longer the scapegoat. I am no longer the discarded daughter hidden in the shadows of someone else's fragile, crumbling ego. I am the sole architect of my own destiny, completely unburdened, unconditionally powerful, and entirely free. The amber glow of the city light spills through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my Buckhead penthouse, casting long, elegant shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The chaotic noise of the past few months, the screaming in the hospital room, the shattering crystal at the Thanksgiving table, the frantic sirens outside the mansion has all faded into absolute unbroken silence. It is a beautiful, expensive silence. I walk slowly across the living room, feeling the perfect alignment of my spine, free from both the physical medical brace and the invisible crushing weight of my family's toxic expectations. I reach the heavy mahogany credenza and pick up a crystal glass filled with a deep, rich vintage red wine. The liquid catches the light, glowing like a polished ruby. I take a slow, deliberate sip, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. I step forward, moving closer to the expansive glass windows that overlook the sprawling, vibrant skyline of Atlanta. This city is a place built on the promise of Black excellence, a place where legacy and family names are treated like currency. But for my entire life, that exact concept of legacy was weaponized against me. I turn away from the skyline and look directly forward. I look right at you. For 30 years, I was told that maintaining the family image was the ultimate sacrifice. I was taught that keeping quiet about the financial abuse, the emotional neglect, and the blatant favoritism was just the price of admission for sitting at the dinner table. Our community often pushes a dangerous narrative. We are told to protect the family at all costs. We are told to forgive the unforgivable just because we share the same bloodline. We are told to smile in the church pews on Sunday morning and pretend that the rot is not eating our foundations from the inside out. My parents, Desmond and Vivian, built their entire identities on that specific brand of hypocrisy. They paraded a fraudulent, arrogant white son-in-law around as their ultimate trophy, allowing him to pillage their generational wealth simply because his presence fed their deep-seated insecurities and social ambitions. They sacrificed their own Black daughter to protect a man who viewed them as nothing more than gullible stepping stones. But blood is not a license for abuse. I say the words slowly, letting the absolute truth of that statement resonate in the quiet room. Sharing DNA with someone does not give them the right to steal your peace, to drain your bank accounts, or to leave you bleeding and defenseless on a surgical table. When people use the concept of kinship as a heavy chain to bind you to their toxic dysfunction, you do not owe them your loyalty. You owe it to yourself to break the chain. When they use family ties to trap you, you must use your self-respect, your financial literacy, and the absolute full extent of the law to free yourself. I take another step forward, the soft silk of my crimson gown shifting around my ankles. I am not a victim anymore. I am not the quiet, scapegoated sister sitting at the folding table near the kitchen door. I am the architect of my own reality. I took the darkest, most terrifying betrayal of my life, and I weaponized it. I used my intelligence, my career, and my unyielding patience to meticulously dismantle the very people who tried to bury me. I did not just survive their cruelty. I audited it, I foreclosed on it, and I evicted it from my life entirely. I walk slowly towards the center of the penthouse living room. Resting on a beautifully carved pedestal table is a single ornate silver picture frame. I pause in front of it, a warm, genuine smile finally breaking across my face. Looking back at me from the photograph is Grandma Hattie. She is wearing her signature pearls, her dark eyes sharp, knowing, and entirely uncompromising. She was the only person who saw through the expensive suits, the designer dresses, and the fake, performative prayers. She saw the sheer, unadulterated greed festering in her own son and daughter-in-law. Grandma knew exactly who they were. I say, softly reaching out to gently trace the edge of the silver frame with my fingertips. She knew they would wait until I was at my absolute weakest to strike. But she was a brilliant, strategic woman. She did not just leave behind a bank account to protect my money. She gave me the ultimate key. She gave me the power to legally and permanently dismantle a profoundly toxic family structure so I could clear the wreckage and rebuild my own life from the ground up. She trusted me to be the one to finally clean house, and I did exactly what she knew I would do. I pick up my wine glass again, holding it with steady, confident hands. The warmth of the penthouse wraps around me, a physical manifestation of the safety and independence I have fought so fiercely to secure. The shadows in the room begin to stretch and lengthen as the evening deepens outside the massive glass windows. I take one final step forward, commanding the space completely and utterly in control of my own destiny. If someone betrays you while you are lying unconscious on an operating table, do not wake up and cry. Do not beg for their love, and do not wait for an apology that will never come. You gather your evidence, you secure your assets, and you wait for the perfect moment to strike. Make absolutely sure that when you finally open your eyes, you are the one holding the scalpel that decides their life. I hold my gaze steady, uncompromising, and fierce. I take one last sip of the rich red wine. I turn my back to the camera, walking slowly and deliberately toward the stunning illuminated view of the city I now conquer. The lights in the penthouse begin to dim, dropping away one by one until only the glowing Atlanta skyline remains visible through the glass. Then the city lights fade away too, swallowed by the darkness. The screen cuts to pitch black,